The Elder Scrolls franchise has over 30 years of expansions, but 8 of them changed everything. From the first attempt at extending Morrowind's lifespan to massive online chapters that redefined what MMO expansions could be, these are the expansions that invented conventions, fixed problems players hated, and proved that good DLC isn't just more content, it's better content. Starting with the one that figured out how to make quest tracking not completely miserable, Tribunal. Tribunal is either the most important Elder Scrolls expansion ever made or a footnote that accidentally invented everything good about expansions. And I can prove it. Released November 6th, 2002. As Morrowind's first expansion, Tribunal did something no Elder Scrolls content had done before. It took place entirely in one city. Mournhold, the capital of Morrowind, became a self-contained urban experience that contrasted sharply with the base game's endless wilderness of ash storms and cliff racers. You couldn't just walk there from Vardenfell. The expansion forced you into this walled metropolitan zone where political intrigue mattered more than survival skills, and every quest revolved around the tension between King Hlalu Helseth and the living god Almalexia. The living god's mythology formed the backbone of Morrowind's entire religious system, but the base game only let you interact with Vivec. Tribunal gave you Almalexia, and the expansion's central mystery involved figuring out whether she had gone completely insane or whether the political chaos in Mournhold was part of some larger divine plan. Spoiler, she had gone insane. The quests deconstructed the entire concept of the Tribunal as benevolent protectors, showing what happens when gods lose their power and refuse to admit it. But here's where it gets interesting. The most revolutionary thing Tribunal did had nothing to do with gods or cities. It fixed the journal. Morrowind's original journal was a nightmare. Every single event, conversation fragment, and quest update got dumped into one chronological list. If you wanted to find a specific quest detail from 20 hours ago, you scrolled through hundreds of unrelated entries hoping you'd recognize the right paragraph. Players hated it. Tribunal introduced journal organization by quest, letting you sort entries by active objective instead of date. This sounds minor. It wasn't. It was the difference between a game you could actually finish and a game where you forgot what you were doing and wandered off to get killed by a Nyxhound. This quality of life fix became standard for every Elder Scrolls game afterward. Oblivion's quest journal, Skyrim's quest markers, even ESO's objective tracking all trace back to Tribunal, admitting that information architecture matters as much as content design. The Dark Brotherhood questline added another layer. Assassins kept trying to murder you in your sleep, and the expansion required investigating why. The trail led into Mournhold's underground sewers, massive dungeon networks that introduced urban dungeon crawling to the series. The assassins, it turned out, were hired by someone connected to the royal court, which meant every political conversation became a potential death threat. Tribunal bundled into the Game of the Year edition on October 31st, 2003, alongside Blood Moon, establishing Bethesda's expansion bundling strategy that would define how they sold DLC for the next 2 decades. The expansion added 17 new weapons, 7 new armor sets, and dozens of new NPCs, but the real content was environmental. Mournhold felt like a real capital city with distinct districts, each with its own social hierarchy and problems. The Great Bazaar, the Temple Courtyard, the Royal Palace, the underground passages, they all created a sense of place that Vardenfell's scattered settlements never achieved. But if you think one city and a fixed journal system sound impressive, wait until you hear about the frozen island where you can become a werewolf and hunt a god. Blood Moon. If you thought Tribunal's god drama was intense, wait until you meet the Daedric Prince, who literally hunts you for sport. Released in 2003 as Morrowind's second and final expansion, Blood Moon threw players onto an island called Solstheim, modeled entirely on Norse mythology, where everything wants to kill you and the weather actively tries to make you miserable. The expansion introduced advanced weather effects, including snowfall and blizzards, that created an immersive Arctic atmosphere that made Skyrim look like a tropical vacation 7 years before Skyrim even existed. You've got 2 major factions fighting for control: the Imperial Legionnaires stationed at Fort Frostmoth trying to maintain order, and the indigenous Skull people practicing shamanic traditions that predate the Empire by thousands of years. The Skull quests involve tests of loyalty, wisdom, and strength, because apparently earning trust requires proving you're not a complete idiot. The main questline investigates the Blood Moon prophecy, which foretells the return of Hircine, the Daedric Prince of the Hunt. And here's where it gets weird. Key figures start disappearing across the island. Captain Falx Carius vanishes from Fort Frostmoth. Tharstan Heartfang, a major Skull leader, goes missing. Even Karstog, a massive frost giant who could bench press a mammoth, disappears without explanation. Each missing figure represents a different faction or power structure on the island, creating political chaos alongside the supernatural threat. Turns out werewolves are behind the disappearances, orchestrating everything as part of Hircine's grand return. But here's the kicker. Players can become infected with lycanthropy, specifically a disease called Sanes lupinus, and choose to either become werewolves or seek cure. This fundamentally alters gameplay. You're not just fighting werewolves anymore. You are one. And unlike most Elder Scrolls diseases where you immediately chug a cure potion and move on with your life, Lycanthropy in Blood Moon is designed as a viable character build. You can embrace it, gain new abilities, and play the entire expansion as a supernatural killing machine, or you can reject it and stay human, but the choice is genuine player agency, not a scripted moment. This was the first time Elder Scrolls made a disease into something you'd actually want to keep, rather than immediately cure. The final quest, Hircine's Hunt, takes you directly into the Daedric Realm's hunting grounds. You're transported to another dimension where Hircine himself confronts you. The quest requires defeating Karstag, the missing frost giant, then choosing which aspect of Hircine to fight. You're literally battling a god in his own realm, and your reward depends on whether you stayed human or became a werewolf. The whole thing is Norse mythology meets supernatural transformation, creating this brutal, primal atmosphere that Tribunal's urban political intrigue completely lacked. Blood Moon proved that Elder Scrolls expansions could go full wilderness survival horror, and players would love it. The contrast between Tribunal's claustrophobic city and Blood Moon's harsh frozen wasteland showed Bethesda could deliver radically different experiences within the same game. And when Solstheim returned in Skyrim's Dragonborn expansion 9 years later, veteran players lost their minds with nostalgia, recognizing locations they'd explored as werewolves back in 2003. But if you think one frozen island ruled by a hunting god is disturbing, wait until you hear about the realm of pure madness ruled by a prince who turns order into chaos every single time without fail. Shivering Isles. Shivering Isles is either the finest Elder Scrolls expansion ever made, or the finest expansion in video game history. I'm not exaggerating. Released March 26, 2007 for Oblivion, this expansion is frequently cited alongside classics like Blood and Wine and The Frozen Throne as proof that expansions can transcend their base games entirely. And I can prove it. The expansion takes place in the Daedric realm ruled by Sheogorath, the Prince of Madness, and the entire environment reflects that. The realm is split into two distinct halves, Mania and Dementia. Mania features vibrant, oversaturated colors, manic NPCs, and giant, glowing mushrooms that make the entire region feel like a fever dream. Dementia is the opposite. Dark, melancholic, depressive, everything is dying or rotting, or both. The visual contrast alone makes this feel like two separate expansions running simultaneously, each reflecting different facets of insanity. Walking from one half to the other genuinely feels like switching genres, from a psychedelic fantasy into a gothic horror, all within the same landmass. But here's where it gets complicated. The Shivering Isles are trapped in a cycle called the Grey March. Every era, the Daedric Prince of Order, Jyggalag, shows up and completely destroys the realm. Every single time. The entire place gets reset to nothing, over and over throughout history, and Sheogorath can't stop it. He's watched his kingdom get annihilated repeatedly and rebuilt it each time knowing full well it would happen again. The main quest involves you becoming Sheogorath's protege and working together to finally break the cycle before Jyggalag arrives and obliterates everything again. To even access the realm beyond the starting area called the Fringe, you have to defeat the Gatekeeper, a massive boss creature stitched together from body parts that serves as both a skill check and a symbolic threshold into madness. It's the game's way of saying, once you cross this line, you're committed to the insanity that follows. And the insanity delivers. The expansion provides 30 to 40 hours of gameplay with a realm constituting 25% of Cyrodiil's total size. That's not a minor addition. That's practically a second game hiding inside the first one. The content density is absurd. 9,500 new dialogue lines, which is more than some full releases. 32 unique ingredients for alchemy. 10 new creatures with different leveled variants. 200 new weapons. 80 pieces of armor and clothing. An Amber and Madness ore crafting system where specialized smiths can forge endgame armor and weapons from collected materials, giving players who fully explore the realm meaningful progression that actually rewards thorough exploration. This isn't padded content. Every system adds genuine depth, and none of it feels like filler designed to inflate a feature list. Sheogorath's personality permeates every quest, every NPC interaction, every location. The writing captures genuine unpredictability and dark humor without feeling forced or gimmicky. Mania NPCs are enthusiastically unhinged. Dementia NPCs are quietly disturbed. One quest has you investigating a conspiracy that may or may not exist, depending on how paranoid you're willing to get. Another has you attending a dinner party that goes sideways in the most Sheogorath way possible. The tonal consistency across thousands of dialogue lines creates an atmosphere that feels genuinely distinct from anything in Oblivion or any Elder Scrolls title before or since. The Grey March provides apocalyptic stakes. This isn't just saving a town or defeating a villain. This is preventing the cyclical destruction of an entire plane of existence that has repeated for millennia. The weight of that history makes every quest feel consequential, like you're fighting against inevitability itself. And the ending, where you literally mantle Sheogorath and become the new Prince of Madness, remains one of the most satisfying conclusions to any expansion in RPG history. If you think one Daedric Prince's realm is wild, wait until you hear about the vampire prophecy that lets you blot out the sun. Dawnguard. Skyrim had vampires from day one, but let's be honest, nobody was building their character around vampirism. It was a disease you caught in a cave and immediately cured because the downsides were miserable and the upsides were basically nothing. Dawnguard changed that completely. Released on June 26, 2012 for Xbox 360 and a little over a month later on PC, Skyrim's first major expansion takes one of the game's most neglected mechanics and turns it into a full-blown power fantasy. The premise is simple but effective. An ancient Elder Scroll contains a prophecy called the Tyranny of the Sun, which predicts that vampires will use a mythic bow and a blood sacrifice to literally blot out the sun. Eternal darkness. No more sunlight. Every vampire's dream vacation, basically. And the player gets dropped right in the middle of it. Here's where Dawnguard does something genuinely interesting. At a quest called Bloodline, you're forced to pick a side, and there's no going back. You either join the Dawnguard, a faction of vampire hunters operating out of a fortress in southern Skyrim, or you pledge yourself to the Volkihar clan, a group of ancient vampires led by Lord Harkon who want to fulfill the prophecy and plunge the world into permanent night. It's not a pick the good guys or the bad guys situation either. Both sides have legitimate arguments. The Dawnguard want to protect the world. The Volkihar believe they're claiming what's rightfully theirs. You're either hunting monsters or becoming one to prevent the apocalypse. That's a genuinely compelling choice for an Elder Scrolls game. But the real star of this expansion is the Vampire Lord transformation. Choosing the vampire path unlocks an entirely new skill tree with abilities that make you feel like an actual supernatural predator. Vampiric Grip lets you telekinetically yank enemies through the air like a Sith Lord. Mistform turns you into an invulnerable cloud of fog that regenerates health, magicka, and stamina simultaneously. Supernatural Reflexes slows time during combat. Blood Healing restores all your health when you kill an enemy by biting them. Poison Talons add 20 points of poison damage to every melee strike. It's absurd. You go from guy with a sword to floating nightmare that ragdolls bandits into walls, which is, a nice upgrade. The Dawnguard side isn't exactly empty-handed either. They get crossbows, a brand new weapon type that players had been requesting since launch. They're slower than bows, but hit harder and feel satisfying in a way that's hard to explain until you've used one. You also get armored huskies as companions, which is exactly what it sounds like. War dogs in armor, fighting vampires alongside you. Beautiful. Beyond the faction conflict, Dawnguard adds 2 entirely new zones that expand Skyrim's lore in unexpected directions. The Soul Cairn is a Daedric realm where trapped souls wander for eternity, a bleak purple wasteland that feels genuinely oppressive to explore. Then there's the Forgotten Vale, which hides the ruins of an ancient snow elf civilization. Snow elves, a race that predates almost everything in Skyrim's known history, reduced to crumbling temples and frozen waterfalls. It's hauntingly beautiful and adds layers of depth to Elder Scrolls lore that the base game barely hinted at. On the equipment side, the expansion adds 19 new weapons, including the long-awaited Dragonbone weapon set, 5 new armor sets, and a face sculptor in the Ragged Flagon down in Riften's Thieves Guild for players who regretted their original character choices. 1,000 gold to fix your nose. Reasonable. Now, one thing worth mentioning, PlayStation 3 players didn't get any of this until February 26, 2013, a full 8 months after Xbox. Performance issues on the PS3 made the expansion borderline unplayable during testing, and Bethesda delayed it repeatedly. PS3 owners watched Xbox and PC players enjoy vampire powers for the better part of a year. Not ideal, but if you think Dawnguard's identity crisis between hunter and hunted was dramatic, wait until the next expansion introduces a villain who's been a Dragonborn longer than you have. Dragonborn. For the entire base game of Skyrim, you're told you're special. You're the Dragonborn, the only one. So when cultists show up out of nowhere, attack you in the street, and tell you there's another Dragonborn who wants you dead, it hits different, because suddenly you're not unique anymore. And the guy who came first, he's been doing this for thousands of years. Miraak is one of the best antagonists Bethesda ever wrote, and the reason is simple. He's you, but older, stronger, and with zero moral compass. During the Merethic era, when dragons ruled over mortals like livestock, Miraak served as a dragon priest on the island of Solstheim, but he looked at the dragons he was supposed to worship and basically said, "No, I think I'll betray all of you." Instead, he cut a deal with Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric prince of forbidden knowledge, trading his loyalty for power no mortal was supposed to have. He turned on the dragons, he turned on his fellow priests, and he did it all because he wanted more, which is, relatable, if nothing else. By the time you arrive on Solstheim, Miraak has been pulling strings from another dimension entirely. He's using magical influence to control the island's population while they sleep, forcing them to build shrines in his name without any memory of doing it. It's genuinely unsettling when you first encounter the entranced workers standing around construction sites in the middle of the night, hammering away with blank expressions. Solstheim itself is a fascinating choice because it's not new. This is the exact same island from Morrowind's Blood Moon expansion, set hundreds of years earlier. Veterans who explored it back in 2003 could return and see what centuries of volcanic activity from Red Mountain had done to the landscape. Raven Rock, the small Imperial mining outpost from Blood Moon, has transformed into a struggling Dunmer settlement. It's environmental storytelling that rewards long-term fans without punishing newcomers who have zero context. But the real star of this expansion is Apocrypha. Hermaeus Mora's Daedric realm is unlike anything else in Skyrim. Towers of books stretching infinitely upward, platforms of bound pages floating over an ocean of toxic ink, tentacles emerging from pools of black liquid, hallways loop back on themselves. It's Lovecraftian horror filtered through a fantasy RPG, and it works because it feels genuinely alien compared to every other location in the game. You access Apocrypha through black books scattered across Solstheim. Each one physically transports you into the realm, and each one grants a unique power upon completion. The most practically useful lets you reset entire skill trees at the cost of 1 dragon soul per tree. For players locked into suboptimal builds for hundreds of hours, this was genuinely life-changing. The final confrontation with Miraak happens at the summit of Apocrypha. He summons 2 dragons mid-fight, absorbing their souls to heal himself while you're trying to stay alive. And when you finally beat him, Hermaeus Mora himself intervenes, impaling Miraak with tentacles and claiming his soul. Because that's the thing about making deals with Daedric princes. They always collect. The expansion also introduces dragon riding, letting you mount dragons and fly across Solstheim. After an entire base game of killing dragons, finally sitting on the back of one felt like the power fantasy Skyrim had been building towards since the opening cinematic. Was the implementation perfect? Not exactly. But soaring over an ash-covered island while hunting for black books is one of those moments where the game just lets you feel powerful. Dragonborn released on December 4th, 2012 at $20, and it's widely considered Skyrim's best expansion. A personal antagonist, an alien Daedric realm, and the return to a location with real franchise history created something that felt like more than additional content. It felt like a conclusion, but if Solstheim showed us what happens when you revisit a location centuries later, The Elder Scrolls Online would take that concept and go even further back in time, starting with the island that started it all, Morrowind. There's something almost poetic about releasing an expansion that pays homage to one of the most beloved RPGs ever made. June 6th, 2017. Over 15 years since Elder Scrolls III changed the genre forever, and ZeniMax knew exactly what they were doing. ESO. Morrowind opens up the entirety of Vardenfell, and I mean the whole thing. Same geographic footprint as the original game. Seda Neen, the Ashlands, those towering mushroom forests that made absolutely no sense but looked incredible, Sadrith Mora, all of it. Every landmark you remember is here, rendered in ESO's engine, populated with other real humans running around in various states of chaos. It's like visiting your childhood home except 700 years before you were born, and also everything is an MMO now. And that's the twist that makes this more than just a nostalgia trip. The entire chapter takes place 700 years before the events of Elder Scrolls III. You're not revisiting Morrowind, you're seeing the history that created the Morrowind you remember. The political tensions, the religious power structures, the slow decay of the Tribunal's influence. All of it is in motion, and you're watching the dominoes get set up, knowing exactly how they'll fall centuries later. But here's where it gets genuinely tense. The central storyline revolves around Vivec, one of the 3 living gods, and the fact that he's dying. Or at least, something is very, very wrong with him. Now, under normal circumstances, a god having a bad day is concerning but manageable. The problem is that Vivec is the only thing keeping a massive meteor from crashing directly into Vivec City. His divine power literally holds it suspended in the sky above the capital. So when Vivec starts losing that power, the meteor starts falling and suddenly you've got an entire island staring down extinction. Your job is to figure out what's causing Vivec's illness. Befriend a Morag Tong assassin, because apparently that's how you solve theological crises in Morrowind, and restore the god's power before the rock does what rocks do when you stop holding them up. The stakes are genuinely apocalyptic, which is refreshing for an MMO storyline that could have easily just been go collect 40 mushroom samples. Beyond the story, Morrowind introduced the Warden class. This was the first new class added to ESO since the game launched, and it came with a very specific selling point. You get a war bear, not a cosmetic bear. Not a bear that follows you around looking cute, a full combat companion that fights alongside you, tanks damage, and generally makes every encounter feel like you brought backup. The Warden itself focuses on nature-based magic, but let's be honest, most people heard war bear and stopped reading the rest of the skill description. The class supports healing, damage, and tanking builds, but the bear is the star. The bear is always the star. Content-wise, the chapter delivers over 30 hours of main story quests, which is substantial enough to justify the price tag without feeling padded. There's also a new public dungeon and a delve system across Vardenfell that gives completionists something to obsess over for weeks. And for the PvP crowd, Morrowind introduced Battlegrounds, a 4v4v4 mode set in smaller arena-like environments. This was a direct response to the reality that Cyrodiil's massive open-world PvP wasn't for everyone. Some people don't want a 200-person siege. Some people want a tight, fast 3-team brawl where you can actually tell what's happening. Battlegrounds gave them exactly that. Narratively, the Morrowind chapter slots into ESO's larger Daedric War storyline as the second major arc following the base game's Planemeld saga. It's the beginning of a thread that would weave through Clockwork City and beyond, connecting Vivek's crisis to broader conflicts between Daedric princes. The whole thing functions as both a standalone story and a chapter in a much longer book, which is exactly how you keep an MMO audience engaged across years of content. But if Morrowind was about returning to familiar ground, the next chapter would take players somewhere most of them had never been allowed to set foot before. Summerset, the Psijic Order, has been name-dropped in Elder Scrolls games since Morrowind. They're this ancient, mysterious group of mages who supposedly mastered time itself, and for over a decade, players heard about them constantly but never actually saw them do anything. They were the Elder Scrolls equivalent of that friend who totally has a girlfriend but she goes to a different school. Well, Summerset finally calls that bluff, and honestly, they deliver. Released on May 21st, 2018 for PC and Mac, with consoles following on June 5th, the Summerset chapter takes players to the Summerset Isles, basically the birthplace of civilization and magic in Tamriel, and it looks like it. Pristine beaches, coral cliffs, vibrant landscapes, and elegant Altmer architecture everywhere you turn. The city of Alinor is this gleaming metropolis with towering crystalline spires set against auroral skies. It's the kind of place that makes you stop moving just to rotate the camera. But the real hook here isn't the scenery, it's the story. The main questline follows Queen Ayrenne's decision to open Summerset to outsiders for the first time. Ayrenne herself is already fascinating before the plot even kicks in. Known as the Unforeseen Queen, she vanished from Summerset as a child and nobody knew where she went. 17 years later, she just shows up, walks in, and inherits the throne. Zero explanation. The entire Altmer aristocracy is standing there like, oh, you're back, cool. And she basically says nothing. That kind of mystery layered on top of a political leader trying to reform an isolationist society would be interesting enough on its own, but then you add a Daedric conspiracy, and things get properly unhinged. The Court of Bedlam is orchestrating chaos behind the scenes, working to undermine Summerset, while Ayrenne tries to hold everything together. Players uncover this conspiracy piece by piece, and the investigation eventually leads to the Crystal Tower, where you have to recover its heart and repair the protective barriers keeping the realm safe. The narrative earns that tension because it spends real time building up what Summerset means to the people who live there before threatening to take it away. Here's where it gets really interesting though. The Psijic Order doesn't just show up as background lore. They get their own full skill line, and completing it requires hunting down time breaches scattered across all of Tamriel. Not just Summerset, everywhere. Each breach was caused by a cursed object stolen from the Psijic Vault of Moawida on Artaeum, and recovering those objects forms its own separate quest chain. It's a clever design choice because it forces you to leave Summerset and explore zones you might have ignored, turning the entire game world into part of the expansion's content loop. And then there's Artaeum itself. The Psijic Order's home island exists partially outside normal geography, which is a polite way of saying it phases in and out of reality whenever the Psijics feel like it. You can visit it during the questline, and it has this otherworldly quality that feels earned after years of buildup. These aren't just some wizards in a tower. They're wizards on an island that doesn't technically exist on any map. That's a power move. The enemy variety keeps things fresh too. You're fighting reef vipers, welwas, coral crabs, and even Pyandonian military forces from across the sea. It's a surprisingly diverse threat roster for a zone that looks this peaceful on the surface. The contrast between Summerset's beauty and the darkness creeping through its institutions is what makes the whole thing work. Everything looks perfect until until you start pulling at the threads. Narratively, Somerset forms a crucial checkpoint in the Daedric War storyline. It picks up threads from Morrowind's Vardenfell investigation and pushes the overarching conflict forward, connecting individual chapter stories into something much larger. The conspiracy here isn't self-contained. It's a piece of a puzzle that spans years of content. But if you thought Daedric conspiracies were the biggest problem Tamriel could face, Elsweyr is about to introduce something with a lot more teeth. And Wings, Elsweyr, every Elder Scrolls Online chapter up to this point gave players new zones, new stories, and new reasons to log in. But none of them gave players the one thing Skyrim made iconic: dragons. That changed when Elsweyr launched on May 20th, 2019 for PC, followed by consoles on June 4th, bringing fire-breathing lizards into an MMO for the first time. And honestly, it kind of changed everything about how the game felt. Elsweyr takes place in the Anaquina region, the northern homeland of the Khajiit, and it looks nothing like what you'd expect from a typical fantasy setting. This is golden savannas stretching to the horizon, arid canyons cutting through sun-baked plateaus, and ancient ruins half buried in desert sand. It's gorgeous. You've got harsh desert badlands in the northern stretches, basically Hammerfell with more cats, then pockets of lusher terrain as you move through river valleys and oasis settlements. The contrast creates a zone that never gets visually stale. But Elsweyr isn't just a pretty vacation destination. The region is still recovering from the Nahatan flu, which devastated the population and left a massive power vacuum. Criminals, imperial remnants, and patriotic Khajiit all fighting over the scraps of a civilization trying to rebuild. That's the backdrop you walk into before the dragons even show up. Here's where it gets interesting. The Season of the Dragon wasn't just a chapter, it was a year-long narrative arc spanning multiple DLC releases throughout 2019, and Elsweyr was the centerpiece. The storyline centers on figuring out why dragons have suddenly returned to terrorize the Khajiiti homeland, and stopping them before there's nothing left to save. The Dragon Guard, a historical faction dedicated to hunting dragons, makes their appearance here, tying into deep Elder Scrolls lore stretching back thousands of years. Players work alongside this organization to uncover the dark purpose behind the Dragon Rampage, and the story actually delivers on that mystery rather than just using dragons as set dressing. The dragons themselves function through Dragonscore World events, dynamic encounters where multiple players coordinate to bring these things down. You can't solo an Elsweyr dragon. Well, technically some absolute maniacs have done it, but the game clearly wants you gathering with other players, managing aggro, and actually working together. You'll be minding your own business picking flowers, and suddenly a dragon lands 40 feet away and 15 strangers materialize out of nowhere to fight it. That's the MMO magic, working exactly as intended. Then there's the Necromancer class, which dropped alongside Elsweyr and immediately became one of the most popular additions to the game. Players could finally command undead armies, specialize in death magic, and summon all manner of horrible things to fight alongside them. The dark magic fantasy that Elder Scrolls has teased through NPC necromancers for decades was suddenly playable, and it turns out letting people raise corpses in a multiplayer game is exactly as fun as it sounds. The class brought genuine mechanical diversity to ESO's roster, offering playstyles that felt fundamentally different from anything else available. The zone packs 6 delves, multiple world bosses, and daily quests involving dragon hunts and Dragon Guard operations. Crafting sets like Dragon Guard Elite and Crafty Alphic tie directly into the zone's factions, giving gear thematic weight beyond just stat numbers. The difficulty stays accessible enough that you don't need endgame gear to enjoy the story content. What makes Elsweyr special isn't just the dragons, though. It's that this was the first time Elder Scrolls Online truly let the Khajiit have their moment. For years, Khajiit existed in Elder Scrolls primarily as merchants, thieves, and skooma dealers you'd bump into in other people's cities. Elsweyr finally showed their homeland, their architecture, their political struggles, their cultural pride. The post-plague recovery narrative adds genuine emotional weight. These aren't just quest givers, they're people rebuilding after catastrophe, and the dragons are making it worse. So you've got spectacle, cultural depth, a brand new class, and the most iconic Elder Scrolls enemy finally making its MMO debut. Not a bad way to close things out. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every crime in Skyrim explained, click the video on the screen now.